He's the joy and the strength of my life. He moves all pain, misery, and strife. He promised to keep me, never to leave me, never, ever come short of his word. Ooh, I got the best and pray, stay in the narrow way. He keeps my life clean every day. I want to go in when he comes back. I've come too far and I'll never turn back. Ooh, God is, yeah, God is, yeah, God is. Can I get a witness that God is? Yeah, God is my all and all. Now while you put your hands together, I want you to sing that with us. Come on, sing. God is the joy and the strength of my life. He moves all pain, all of it. Promise to keep me, never to leave me, never ever come short. I don't get too fast and breathe. Keeps my life clean. Yeah.
Well, good evening. Welcome to Second Baptist Church, celebrating Black history. I know you were expecting Pastor Todd Johnson, but he couldn't be with us tonight. He's in our prayers. I'll be filling in, so don't treat me like a substitute teacher like you used to do back in the day. I know how y'all do. So let's not do that. Like I said, my name is Pastor Peter Osborne. I'll be your presenter tonight, and I'm honored and privileged to have this opportunity. And thank you so much for coming out. Thank everyone that's on Facebook and YouTube that are watching us. So we're going to just jump right into it. What I want to do is, because, well, I wasn't expected to be standing here tonight. So what I want, but I thought it was a great opportunity to, from our opening lesson, there were some things that I mentioned. And what I would like to do is like maybe do a deep dive into just a couple of the details that I talked about in our first session. But what I also want to do is stir up your pure minds and get us to recognize why Black history is so important, why history is so important. Not just Black history, but history is important. Because you'll see a lot of things that we talk about tonight is happening right now, today. There are some things there's some moving pieces that if we're not careful, we're going to be in the same predicament we were in 200 years ago. So with that being said, let's talk about Carter G. Woodson. We call him the father of Black history. And the way he got started, he was a brilliant man. He was the first person to receive his PhD who had parents that were enslaved. So he's a first generation out of slavery, and he's at Harvard. He's pursuing his PhD, and the thing that really ignited the flame in him was one day he's sitting in class, and his professor, who was Edward Channing, who had won Pulitzer Prizes for his history books. The country was using his books to teach the children. You know, he set the curriculum for how history in America would be taught. And so one day, Carter G. Woodson is sitting in his class, and the professor says the Negro had no history. And that kind of ignited a flame in him, because he knew good and well that there was history with our people. So after hearing his instructor's, bad information, and a short time later, he attended the Lincoln Jubilee and half century of emancipation. This was like a big conference for black people in Chicago. Let's see. Yeah, here's a picture of the building. And it was located in the Bronzeville neighborhood. Oh, wait a minute, didn't. There we go. That's what it looked. That's what the building looked like back then. It was in Chicago, so it's this big exhibition center, and it was located on the edge of the neighborhood of Bronzeville. And a little black history there. Bronzeville was a really well-to-do black neighborhood in Chicago. And a little black history is that I know a brother who owns a watch company who was from Chicago, who lived in Warren for a short time, and he started a watch company called the Brownsville Watch Company. And this is one of his watches right here. So it's one of the few brothers who owns a watch company. So that's, he was given ode to his Chicago roots. And I would really encourage you, here's some pictures from that Jubilee, and I would really encourage you to look up the program and go through it and see what they were doing at the exhibition. And what they were doing at the exhibition, it was a lot of social groups. There used to be a lot of social clubs. People used to get together just with different interests. Not so much how we do now. We're pretty much isolated now. People are isolated. Very few people socialize. And one of the last places to socialize is the church. When you think about it, a lot of people don't belong to lodges and things like that they used to do back in the day. And so that was a place where you could see all the different social groups. There was also where they showed off people, different artisans, like arts and crafts, and different things that people had invented. They were showing how the ingenuity of black people. And so, okay, my slides are behind. Now, this is a badge that they were wearing. Like a lot of times you go to these exhibits, and they give you a name tag to wear. Well, this is the badge that they were wearing back then. And you see how prominent Lincoln was. Now, this is an exhibition for black people. But the main person on the badge was Lincoln, because the imagery of Lincoln to black people was very important. It was very important because they looked at Lincoln as freeing the slaves. But that was one of the things that Carter G. Woodson had a hard time with. Now, he chose, we have Black History Month now, but Black History, it started out as Black History Week. And he started it in February because that's when Lincoln and Frederick Douglass was born. And so people were already celebrating. And people had started celebrating, they started celebrating Lincoln 100 years after his birth. And so it was like a big deal. Lincoln was a big deal. So, but Carter G. Woodson, he didn't like how people were talking about how they did black history, because he felt a lot of people were unqualified. Remember, he went to Harvard, so he was extremely smart. So there was a lot of people out there talking about black history that he didn't believe were qualified to talk about it. And then the other thing was that a lot of times they were using myths and fables. They were just making up stuff. It wasn't real, true history. And so that's what really drove Carter G. Woodson to start recording our history and to get other people to collect our history. This is a quote I always start out with. For the great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Too often we hold fast to the cliches of our forebears. We subject all facts to a prefabricated set of interpretations. We enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. We do the same thing with the Bible. We we believe a lot of myths and fables without actually giving it a lot of thought. You know, some things that we just take that if you think about it, well, that couldn't be true. And usually the Bible bears it out not to be true if you just slowed down and read it, you know. So they call Lincoln the great emancipator. You know, but they also, now when you go back to your high school days or elementary school days, what did they teach you about Lincoln? Let's talk about what we know about Lincoln.
They say he freed slaves.
He freed slaves, okay. What else? How about, they called him Honest Abe. Yeah, he was Honest Abe. You know, and they painted him as this country bumpkin. Remember they said how he walked all over the place? You know, if you go back to your elementary school days, they talk about how Lincoln walked all over Kentucky and all of that. Well, Lincoln became the president of the United States because Lincoln was a powerful lawyer for the railroads. He could have never got to that stage if he was just this country bumpkin that they told us he was in school. So one of the things that Carter G. Woodson always talked about is how we've been miseducated. Yes, sir.
One thing about Lincoln with the states, he said that they was going to abolish slavery in the states, but the territories out west, they could still have slavery.
Yeah.
So they never said anything about, you know, him making that statement. So he really was for slavery, but where his political stand was with the railroads and the work and all that, he was signing the Emancipation Proclamation.
We need to remember,
right, that was basically all he did.
Lincoln was first and foremost a politician.
Right.
He was, and so we have to remember that about politicians today. They'll say whatever is expedient for them at the time.
Yes.
Right.
And it's up to the people to hold the president or our elected officials responsible for what we want them to do. So we have to be socially or politically engaged. You know, so yeah, Lincoln was a politician to his core. And we'll see that as I develop these ideas that I want to share with you tonight. But they call him the great emancipator. He was one of the many white Americans of the era who believed that if slavery were abolished, a race war would inevitably would happen. There are people today who still hold that thought. They think if we give black people too much freedom, they're gonna start wilding out. They're gonna start a war. You know, but who do you see in the militias? You know?
Okay.
You know, but a lot of times I call that projection. You know, when you look at historically, you look at like South Africa and when they were going through apartheid, because that's something that we can look back on in our lifetime. And their whole fear was if we allow the blacks to be equal, they're going to retaliate for all the pain and discomfort that we caused them.
Right.
But when it happened, when apartheid ended, that didn't happen. Yes, ma'am.
Online, one of the viewers said Lincoln was half black, is what she was told.
Yeah, that's a rabbit I don't want to chase at this time, but that has been said. There's a book, and I can't remember the name of the book right now, that lists what they say were, like, they say Obama wasn't the first black president.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Interesting.
But if you ask Lincoln, was he black?
No.
He'd tell you he wasn't black, okay? and when we're gonna go to some of his quotes, and you can tell he thought he was in a higher seat than black people. He didn't believe that all people were equal. So since the United States was destined, this is what their thought process was. Since the United States was destined, they think it was, and Pastor Heller talked about it, about, you know, it was preordained that the United States would be a white country. Since the United States was destined to be a white nation, emancipation must be accomplished by the immigration of freed people out of the United States. Lincoln's first thought was, if we end slavery and we free the black people, they can't stay here. He didn't believe that they could coexist. And he went, there's congressional paperwork where he put together, he got money from Congress to ship black people out of the country. Okay, let's.
Why does that sound familiar?
You get it. Are you saying that sounds familiar because you kind of feel that happening today?
Yeah. Well, they made a new list. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not.
They published a new list of countries. That's all I'll say about it. Go home, do your homework.
Okay. But if we watch, and we have to be careful because we'll see that a lot of the stuff is done with laws. Everything that was done was lawful. Slavery was lawful. So we have to watch. That's why it's important that we watch what our politicians are doing. Because everything that is done, they do it through the laws. So, in August of 1862, August 14th, Abraham Lincoln hosted a deputation of free Negroes at the White House, led by the Reverend Joseph Mitchell. That's the picture that you see on the screen. He was the Commissioner of Immigration for the Interior Department. This was the first time African Americans had been invited to the White House on a policy matter. The 5 men were there to discuss a plan resettling emancipated people on a 10,000-acre parcel of land in present-day Panama. So, if Lincoln had his druthers, y'all wouldn't be sitting here today.
Right.
Now, don't get me wrong, the land that, this is actual pictures of the place that he wanted to send them. Send us. Send y'all. Now, the 5 delegates, let me just throw their names up there so they won't go free. There was Edward Thomas. He was the chair of a prominent black intellectual and he was a cultural leader. He was like a thinker in Washington, D.C. There was John F. Cook. He was an Oberlin educated teacher who ran a church-affiliated school. Now you will see that there's a thread of that the church, he got the church involved in his plan. Then there was Benjamin McCoy, a teacher and founder of an all-black congregation. There was John T. Colston, a prominent black Freemason. Then there was Cornelius Clark, a member of a social, civil, and statistical association, an important black social and civil organization that had recently sought to banish several immigration promoters from Washington. So he brought these 5 brothers to the White House. But right away, he didn't bring them to the White House to get their opinion. And you can go online and I'm trying to think of what the name of the paper was. But this is a quote from the paper. If you look up Lincoln's Panama Plan, and it'll go back, you can go back and read the transcript from the meeting. Now, I just wanted to read this quote to you so that we understand, this is Lincoln's own words. "You and we are different races," he began, "and have between us a broader difference than exists between almost any other 2 races. The African American race suffered greatly," he continued, "by living amongst us, while ours suffered from your presence." Wow. You invite somebody to your house and this is how you talk to them. Lincoln went on to suggest, "But for your race among us, there could not be war." He was saying right here that it was because of black people we had the Civil War. But for your race among us, there could not be a war. And without the institution of slavery and the colored race as a basis, the war could not have existed. The only solution, he concluded, was for both of us to be separated. Yes, sir.
So basically what he was saying is, we're done using you guys. You done built this country. We done all got rich from your free labor, forced labor. Now it's time to go.
That's right.
That's basically what he was saying.
That's basically,
Right.
that's what I would have heard sitting in that room.
You don't want it with all the fancy words. But okay.
Now, there have been people working, yes, yes,
Was Masons segregated?
yes.
The Masons,
They
okay.
still are.
They still are, yeah. I don't know much about them, I just,
It's a social organization, so. Well, if you look, there's the two different temples here in Warren, the Masonic temples.
just a second.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Now, there have been groups working to, when Pastor Heller talked, I think it was Pastor Heller or I think it was Sister Leah, who talked about how the United States had repatriated people to Liberia. You know, they had settled there. But we always have to remember, in the United States, it's always about the dollar. It's always about capitalism. Capitalism trumps everything, pun intended. So, they were looking to, they said, well, we don't want to, you go back and like I said, you can read it. You can, he said, Africa, well, we send you down to, and I can't pronounce the name of the little area that they were going to send them to in Panama, which is Panama today. It wasn't Panama then. He said, it's only a quarter of the way that you would have to go. And the climate is good for you people. He said it's closer to the climate that is over in Africa. You know, he wasn't lying. But the whole thing was, it was all about dollars. They thought there were these vast coal mines in this area. So they said, we have to send them somewhere where they can work. We can't just send them somewhere. So they wanted to send them so that they could work in the coal mines down there in Panama. I call it Panama because I can't pronounce the name of it. But there were people who came out against his idea. There were senators. Like I said, you can go back and this is history. This is in our country's history. Senator John P. Hale, a radical Republican. Now you have to remember, back then there was the Republicans who was filling us, and not the Democrats. So the idea of removing the whole colored population from this country is one of the most absurd ideas that ever entered into the head of a man or a woman. And then there was Lincoln's Treasury Secretary, Salmon Chase. He wrote in his diary, how much better would it be a manly protest against prejudice against color and wise effort to give free men homes in America. What he was saying, why don't we just be a man about it? Give these people homes. Give these people what they deserve because they've been performing all this free labor. He was saying, let's just speak, instead of trying to ship everybody out of the country, let's just speak to prejudice. Let's just stop racism. But that fell on deaf ears.
Yeah, that didn't work.
And then there was William Lloyd Garrison, who was a big abolitionist, and he had in his newspaper, the nation's 4 million slaves are as much of this natives, or as much the natives of this country as any of their oppressors. And that's the argument I stick to today. We are just as much as Americans as anybody else. But we have to remember, now we always thought that if you were born in America, that makes you an American. But if you remember just a couple short weeks ago, the court turned Trump back because what did he want to do? Get rid of that. Yep. He wanted to get rid of it. So it's important that we recognize how history works so that when it confronts us again, we know how to react to it.
do you know what would be, we had a roundabout about this at home because it made no sense. What would be citizenship? Because I wouldn't be a citizen because mine came from Ireland.
Well, you were born here though, right?
But if they got rid of birth citizenship,
Right.
I wouldn't.
So who could be an American
Who
then?
would be an American? And my husband was like, "What are you talking about?"
I would say the natives, the Native Americans,
Thank you.
the indigenous people.
But
Now,
surely they didn't intend that.
no, they didn't. What they meant was
Those who
to
said
say
get rid of.
white people. White people are Americans, and everybody else got to go. That's what they're getting at.
But I mean, currently, if you said get rid of birth,
That's what they're getting at.
I don't know where they're getting that.
Because
They don't need it.
they're making it up.
Thank you.
The-
I think that's the answer.
The whole, first of all, the whole race thing is just a social construct. Race is a made up social construct. We're all of one blood. We all are of the human race. And so this whole race thing, like Pastor Heller tried to, who did explain that it's about language and lands, is about where people come from. It's not so much the color of your skin, which
You should have an educated man in office speaking of that. He's not educated. That's number one.
that is also true. And then Frederick Douglass said, the President of the United States seems to possess an ever-increasing passion for making himself appear silly and ridiculous, if nothing else. So Lincoln got a lot of pushback.
Like today.
Yeah. Now, he did go forward with the plan. But he was doing two things in parallel. He was writing the Emancipation Proclamation, and he was working on, history says that he went and talked to somebody in the basement about sending people to Panama, and then he went up and signed the Emancipation Proclamation. They said he was working both ideas. He was a politician.
And then they say he was the most honest, so that shows he was a liar. Straight
Well, anybody who tell you they don't lie
is a lie.
But he entered a deal with a Kansas senator to head this whole thing up. They had money, they had people that were going to go. But then 2 days after he did the Emancipation Proclamation, he backed out of the deal. Now, like I said, there were people who were signed up. There were people who had sold everything they had. They was ready to go. But all of a sudden, there was no place to go. And they talked about the heartache that caused. You know, you sold everything you had. And being a black person, you don't have that. Back then, there was no safety nets. So when you sold all your stuff, well, you did have some cash, but the inroads that you made were now lost. So he signs the Emancipation Proclamation, which was a great document, but it didn't free everybody. The Emancipation Proclamation did not free everybody. It did not totally abolish slavery.
Who did it free?
Some folk got free. And I'll show you a list of those people who got free, but I'm jumping a little bit ahead of this. Well,
The list of states.
it's the list of states.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a list of states.
It sounds like a lot. I
Yeah, I got this real long list.
know.
So we have a civil war going on. And no matter what and you see there how they're trying to revise history now. They said that the Civil War was not about slavery. It was about state rights. But if you go back and you look at Lincoln's comments, he said it was because black people was here and that we had slavery. That's why we was fighting the war. He said if you didn't have black people and if you didn't have slavery, you wouldn't have the Civil War. Those were Lincoln's comments, not the people who are trying to rewrite history now, who say that the Civil War was fought over state rights. So the Civil War was going on, and while the war was going on, you know, when they go down in the South and you get plantations overrun, now you have chaos, you know, because they're fighting these battles basically in fields, around people's homes, outside of neighborhoods, outside of towns. They're fighting on American soil. And so the chaos that happens from that, a lot of the slaves were able to go free. And so what they were doing was they was going behind the Northern line. They were joining up with the Northern Army because the Northern Army was saying they were here to abolish slavery. And so it was General Benjamin Butler. And I go down these rabbit holes when I'm on the internet, and because sometimes there's names that will click, and I'll start chasing that thing, and but I love to do though is go back to the original documents, back to the original newspaper articles, get the original quotes, so that I don't get what somebody else's interpretation of it. So we have Benjamin Butler, who was a general, and he was the first one to say, what are we going to do with all these slaves that are coming across the line? And because he didn't know what to do with them, because they were saying it was held that the Constitution of the United States did not give Congress or non-slaveholding states any right to interfere in the institution of slavery. Slavery was lawful. So they couldn't just say that they were getting rid of slavery because it was lawful. So he found the loophole. He called the escaped slaves contraband, because the Southerners held to it that the slaves were property. So General Butler said, well, we can keep contraband if, when we go and take over a land, we get to keep the contraband. So they didn't call them people, they would call contraband. And like I said, I like to go get the original docs, as close to the original documents and things as I can. And I love the editorial cartoons. I love to go back and look at the editorial cartoons, because that kind of tells you how people were thinking back in the day. Without reading the whole long article, you can get a picture is 1,000 words. And I don't know if you can read that, but it says one of the FFVs after his contraband. See, the guy dressed up in a clown, that's a Southerner. And so that's Butler there with the sword at him. He's saying that they're trying to get their property back, but they ain't gonna let them get it back. So General Butler was at Fort Monroe, and that was one of those rabbit trails that I went down. Fort Monroe, I heard of it before, and so I started chasing that rabbit. I'll just say that. So this is the first picture that I could find about Fort Monroe. But Fort Monroe was, we've heard of it because that's where first slaves came in. That's where the first settlers came in. This was and one of the things that started me down a rabbit trail was what they call him, John Smith was his name. You heard some of you, have you heard of John Smith before? That name might sound familiar. Well, we'll get to it. But all of the slaves were running to this fort. And after a while, the fort became known as Freedom's Fortress, because that's where all the slaves were going. And the general would put them to work. He allowed them to earn their keep, and so he started playing around with the idea of them serving in the army, because they weren't allowed to serve in the army because you have to be a human to be in the army. But like I said, one of the rabbit trails that I went down was what was his name? It was John Smith and Pocahontas. Does that sound familiar? And but the point that I want to make is how when we were in school, because John Smith and Pocahontas, remember, Pocahontas was supposed to save John Smith, or they supposed to have this romantic thing.
I didn't watch about that. Yeah.
Tell us the story. Could you tell us the story real quick in a short snippet? The Disney story, because that's what's important.
The Disney version.
Yes.
So the settlers came in, and basically they're looking for gold. And every time they didn't know about the Indians, so they called them savages.
Okay.
And so that's how it starts. So that's how they come. He's looking for the savages, and that's how they meet up.
Yeah, right, Pocahontas?
Yeah, that's how him and Pocahontas meet up. And then Pocahontas sneaking out of her house where her daddy was like a chief. Pocahontas sneaking out to go see John
The white
Smith.
man?
Blonde.
Lord, girl.
Pocahontas is an Indian.
Yes. Pocahontas was an
Is
Indian.
an Indian.
Okay.
And they said she snuck out of her house to go see.
John Smith. It was like a love story.
Truth of the matter is.
Like Romeo and
Truth
Juliet.
of the matter is.
Come on, give us the truth.
Okay. That's what Pocahontas really looked like.
That's not how she looked.
Well, he can have it. I mean,
But see, that's not the whole story.
Right.
The story was Pocahontas was kidnapped
oh.
when she was between 9 and 11 years old.
John.
Well, he wasn't the main character. It was another man, and she was forced into marriage. And they dressed her up and paraded her around, and they converted her to Christianity, and they paraded her around as like this. They called it. Was it a noble savage? This is a noble savage.
She don't look Indian on there.
Well, because all this what they did to her.
Did to her.
Yeah. And my point was, that's one of them rabbit holes I go down. But the point is, what they told us in school was a miseducation. So, back to General Benjamin. So, he has all of this. Remember, the war is almost like at a stalemate. You know, they're just killing a lot of each other. You know, and so he has this resource here that he's playing. We can use these guys. Let them fight for their freedom. And like I said, I like to go back and get all those old documents. But this picture here, I don't know if you can see it that well. It says a contraband barricade. Come and get your property. If you can see the people kneeling in the front, those were the black soldiers. The black soldiers were the barricade, and the white soldiers were, you know, they had these human shields. Blacks were allowed to fight, but they weren't put in the best positions.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Did they have weapons?
Yes. Yes, they gave them weapons. And let's see, this picture is like an advertisement, but it says, him fathers hope, him mutters joy, him darling little contraband boy. This is a little black kid he's holding up.
Which one? What picture is
The
that?
red picture.
Like a baby, because you
Yeah.
don't even see no feet.
I know. It looks
Well,
like
y'all
child.
remember when you watch the Little Rascals, how Alfalfa and them walked around with them, they look like a dress.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing here.
Um,
And then you can see that the soldiers that were part of that regiment. So like I said, so they have all of these former slaves, and so now they decide to allow them to fight. And the battle that I want to talk about is they wouldn't allow the black soldiers to fight because they didn't think they could be disciplined. They didn't think they could be brave enough. But then they had the Battle of Milliken's Bend. And it was a short fight, but it was the first major battle that they allowed black soldiers to fight in. The thing is, the South thought that the North's supplies were coming through Milliken's Bend. And so they got this big contingent of Confederate soldiers to attack it because they wanted to disrupt the supply line for the Northern soldiers. So they had this big contingent to overrun this small fort with this ragtag group of soldiers. They said most of the black soldiers had only had their guns for a week, so they hadn't been trained. They said, yeah, here, go fight. You know, there was no boot camp. There was none of that. Here's a pistol. You're in the army now.
And the front line too, huh?
And on the front line.
Everything else worse. Guns they got.
And the battle took place,
Yeah.
and 100 men from the Union side died, but 200 from the Southern forces died. Now, the Northern force lost, but the blacks killed way more folk. Because the Northern, they were just overpowered, and so they had to retreat. But them soldiers killed way more of them than they killed of the Northern soldiers. And so that got everybody's attention, that these men were fierce. Even though they were, and then they, you know, you can go back in the history and you can read the quotes where, wow, so if they were trained, you know, if they had good equipment, if they had good leaders, ooh, they could do something. So, once again, you have to be twice as good. You know, y'all know how the story.
Yeah.
You know how the story. Okay, let's keep pushing.
It's mad.
So the Emancipation Proclamation was this great document that we've been given. And let me just quote. I love quoting James Baldwin. He says, "It comes as a great shock to discover that the flag to which you have pledged allegiance has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to see Gary Cooper killing off the Indians. And although you are rooting for Gary Cooper, the Indians are you." So there's all of these images, and I think in the last session that I teach, I'm going to deal with historical images. I want to talk about how images shape how we think, how images control us. So, you know, so these are the images of the time of Lincoln.
Speaking of date, when did they publish that picture of Baldwin? Do you know? Is the year on there?
Yeah, it's real tiny.
I can't see it. I don't know.
Won't blow up.
No, not in presentation mode. I can get that for you though, or you can just
I can
Google
look it up. I can look it up.
Baldwin being on the cover of Times.
Yeah.
Great author.
There's a question on
Yes.
Says, is that where they got don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes?
That I can't answer. I don't know. But I think that was like
That was the
Revolutionary
British.
War.
That was
Yeah.
the English.
Yeah, doing it. Yeah,
What that mean? Being this close?
yeah. When you can see the whites of their eyes, then you're close enough to hit them.
Okay, it's right there.
Why we need a gun?
Let's see. Okay, so here's the states. Where here 3 million slaves were freed. That was in Arkansas, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi. Now you can see the numbers of slaves that were in these states.
Wow.
63.
Wow.
Wow.
Mississippi and Alabama, okay.
Now when you
Of course, Mississippi and Alabama were the most popular. King Cotton.
Yep.
In Georgia.
Yep.
But
Yes, sir.
Proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, right?
January 1st,
But
1863.
it wasn't but 2 years later when Texas finally freed the slaves.
We're gonna talk about
Right.
that.
Okay, maybe I gotta go through ahead of the game. But I started seeing all those numbers and Texas was on there.
Yep.
Let's hit a button.
What's different than the two? Let's see Mississippi again and Texas.
Because I copied and pasted bad.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mississippi should only be on there once.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's my bad.
So the white dot and the.
Because at first I had them all in one line, then I took it out of it and moved it to.
So the orange don't mean nothing.
No.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
That's how I reformatted it when I copied and
Gotcha,
pasted.
gotcha.
And then the institution of slavery was not disturbed by the proclamation in 8 states, which contained 831,780 slaves. These are the states that it didn't disrupt slavery. And then the remainder were emancipated by the 13th Amendment to the National Constitution, making the whole set, But the thing about the 13th Amendment, didn't, well, it freed all slaves, but it didn't abolish slavery. Slavery is still allowed if you do a criminal offense. The prison system is a slave system.
Yeah, the prison, yeah.
Yep.
That's why you're not allowed to vote.
Put them on a chain gang.
Yep. Yes, sir.
It's interesting, those states that you mentioned, that it didn't affect all states along the northern, the Mason-Dixon line.
Yep. And when you look at like the number of, to me, I get a vibe from a state. Every state has a vibe. And when I look at the number of slaves that they had in that state, now I know where that vibe comes from. So the power of the ballot we need in sheer defense. Else what shall save us from a second slavery? We have to remember that we have to be socially conscious, because if we're not, well, we've kind of fallen asleep here recently because, well, anyhow, I'm gonna get us taken off Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm getting ready to get
But that was the last slide I was going to present. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
The Time magazine was, I believe, the year they shot Kennedy.
Oh, okay.
So that has a place.
Was it shot in 1963? And so she said, yeah, that's when she looked it up and said it was.
Yep.
It breaks my head that they published that in 63 and did what they did after 63.
But you gotta
In
understand,
addition to what they did before 63.
but you gotta understand, that was during the civil rights movement. The March on Washington was earlier, that's.
Yep.
But it still had to go down in some circles.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Well, I thank you for your attention. I thank you for coming out. I look forward to, I've talked to Pastor Johnson about his presentation and the information that he's going to present. I'm telling you, it's local history. So I think it's going to be really interesting. So stay tuned. He'll be up next week and he'll give the history of the local black church. Amen?
Amen.
Yeah. Oh, and we have snacks, we have food, we have pizza. So please help yourself. Help with the cleanup.